I had a pretty weird experience that I wanted to share with everyone. Not just as a warning, but I just want to get your take on how I dealt with it and if I did the right thing. This wasn't just one incident, it was a few. So, I worked a few different jobs. One was as a store manager, and one was as a forest service worker. Now my job wasn't like your typical park ranger one. I basically just had to do tree surgery or tree maintenance. I wasn't just a maintenance guy though, because I was actually trained to do CPR and other life-saving things if I ever had to do it. So I was a little bit more skilled, I guess, than just a typical groundskeeper, but a lot of my job was just to care for the trees and stuff. Now this job always become a lot harder while working in winter. That was because of a plethora of reasons. One is, well, the trees are dying and they can easily break. Two, the area that I worked in had an issue where homeless people would sometimes take them down to make fires and stuff elsewhere. I mean, you'd have like an ancient tree sitting there. You come back a little bit later on, even in the same day sometimes, and you'd find that thing completely destroyed. I'm not a massive tree guy too, just I found it quite annoying. To be honest, in winter we didn't really have to worry about the fires because of course, how's a fire going to spread out there? So yeah, we just took our time to focus on other things. Now as I said, I had a few jobs. Sometimes when I wasn't working there, I'd also be a store manager. Now I remember while working in my store one day, it was pretty late and we had a weird person come in. One of the girls was actually getting quite scared of him. Apparently it was just a weird guy. He used to say really weird and creepy things to them. The thing was, virtually every time that I went out there, he would have been long gone, so I didn't really know whether to believe them or not. I felt like they were just using it as an excuse sometimes to do other things. We didn't have cameras too, so there's no way I could really check on it, but I did take their word on it. I asked them to describe this person, and they said, well, basically like a homeless person who would lurk around. I told them that if they saw him coming again, that they should make sure they lock the doors and don't let him in and just call me. The problem was, this happens sometimes, and it was when I wasn't actually at the store. It's while I was out in the forest, and I told them, no, call when I'm there, I can't do anything now. It's kind of funny thinking of it, but I guess they were quite creeped out. You know what really annoyed me most about it? The other management did not care. I mean, literally, they wouldn't do a single thing to try and improve this or stop it being a problem. And that didn't go well with me. I thought, God, I'm basically doing everything here. I did it because it made some extra money. The forest job didn't pay too well. However, I had a weird thing happen. I was there one night basically doing the night shift. It was a cold winter night, so you don't see so many people now. Normally it's quite peaceful, to be honest, and you can just enjoy like your coffee and just looking out. Now, we weren't really supposed to drink them, but everybody did. I mean, hey, it's the night shift. How are you meant to get through it otherwise? So yeah, that's what we were doing. Now, we had a look around, and we didn't see anyone. The other worker says goodnight and goes off home. I was there alone now, and I noticed something. There's a glowing ember of a cigar or cigarette. I couldn't quite tell. It looked big enough to be a cigar, but it wasn't smoking like one, so I thought maybe it's just a weird cigarette or a few. I then thought, oh no, as I can see the dark hood of someone. It's more like a cloak. They look homeless and weird. Maybe I finally encountered them. I think to myself, maybe they weren't so crazy after all, the girls. And I waited. I didn't think too much was going to happen, and I was fairly confident that I was going to be able to harm myself if it decided that it was going to go down. I also had a small weapon with me. I mean, it's just a pocket knife, but that thing feels much bigger when you're in a dangerous situation. So I waited. It seems like this guy is kind of just scouting at me and just slowly watching me. He kind of lurks around, then goes off into the woods, barefooted, I kid you not. His feet are disgusting. I don't understand how somebody could be out there in the cold like that, and I think, yeah, that's not normal. I actually start to doubt my own eyes and think maybe I'm seeing things, or maybe it's some kind of ghost or something. There were rumours of this road that we're on being haunted because there was a big car accident once, and the guy there apparently didn't make it and still haunts here. They say that you see him at night, but you never see him barefoot. He kind of just idly wanders at the side of the road. I was getting quite freaked out and decided to lock the door for a bit. I didn't want anyone coming in. I pulled the close sign up to try and calm myself down. Like I said, there wasn't any cameras in here, so I didn't have to worry too much about that. I mean, I didn't want another big boss looking over me saying, "Oh, why have you scared off the customers," saying it's closed, but I just didn't feel safe. It's also getting terribly cold because one of the heaters has stopped working. I decide that it's my turn now to try and fix it. Now, I don't know what to do. I've took this thing apart, and to be honest, I didn't have a clue why I did that in the first place. It looked mighty dusty though, so I cleared off all of the dust. I then get a burn and a sharp pain in my arm. God, they didn't even turn this thing off and they've asked me to fix it, I say aloud. As I say this, I feel something and turn over my shoulder. I can't quite describe it, but it was almost like I had a tick and sudden urge to get an idea of my surroundings. You're just tired, man, it's nothing. And I go back to what I was doing. I still can't figure it out and it's annoying me now. But eventually, I managed to get it back. So I put this thing back on and it doesn't work, so I just hit it. And immediately it comes to life and starts blowing at first cold air into my face. I can't believe that, I say to myself. You know, I was always one for hitting things or kicking them to try and get them back to life. I used to do it in the printer room in my old office all the time, and it would work like a charm. I don't know why I stopped doing it. I then stay there for a while just holding up my hands to the warm air that's slowly blowing out, and I feel quite good now. I decide to go and make another coffee. I had a cut-off time actually where I wouldn't drink too much caffeine in the day because I was one who couldn't sleep very well if I had caffeine, but at this point in time I didn't really care too much. And also seeing the person earlier scared me. I start to think more and more about the very realistic possibility that I've had my first paranormal encounter. I end up sitting up on my chair, forgetting that I've got the closed sign on the door, and I slowly drift off. I had quite an intense dream. I had a problem at the time where I'd always have nightmares. I don't remember what this was exactly, but I was in some kind of nuclear power plant or something. It was creepy as heck. I was around just doing maintenance even in that dream. I mean, God, I can't get away from it. And somebody was following me. Now I slowly open up my eyes, and I see there's a customer at the window. I get up quickly to see what's happening, and they seem to have vanished. Now it takes me a little while before I actually wake up enough to figure out what this is, and at first I think it's just a figure of my mind. Probably linked into my dreams somehow, but I don't know. I look at the clock. God, it's only been 10 minutes. I can't believe that. I thought I'd happily slept through a big part of my shift, but I haven't. Worse, I'm not going to sleep later now, and the caffeine's done its best to keep me up. So yeah, I suppose that was the one positive of it. I go around and put on the open sign onto the other side of the window, and I want to let people know that we're open. To be honest, I was just desperate to have a normal interaction. I looked around though outside quickly, and I want to see if there's anyone out there. I can see some footprints leading into the forest and close to the window. God, that's scary. The thing was though, they were partly filled with snow, so I can't be absolutely certain that it wasn't somebody there earlier, and maybe somebody normal, but why did they lead to the forest? I then start thinking about how wrecked my sleeping pattern's gonna be when I have to go back to my forest working job. I'm very paranoid and decide that I have to get a weapon now. I just want something to defend myself with. I'm not someone that can really fight, so that's never been an option if I'm in a difficult situation. So, instead, I'm basically just stuck there. Now, when I head back in, I go to open the door, but it doesn't open. I think, gosh, that's weird. I was certain. Then I realised that I've let it lock on itself. I think, God, I just can't get it right. As I do so, I hear a tapping sound coming from my car. Now, I don't know what it was, but I think this is especially weird. I think, what on earth now? As I rattle around for my keys and go and get the spare one that opens the back of the store. I do this very quickly, then disappear around the side. At least I've got this now. And I hear the alarm deactivate as I go in. Ha, that shouldn't have happened, and I laugh to myself. Now I get in, and I realise too that something else is wrong. There's some footprints going around, just like somebody's come out of the shower. Now I don't know why in my stupid mind I was fixated on how did the alarm get turned off, and I don't realise that there's some movement coming from inside the window. I presumed it was coming from outside, so I decided to go in the back quickly. I then hear a scurrying sound and hear the front open. Now I was actually angry. I get the knife out my pocket and do a little charge, screaming, making all kinds of sounds. No, I'm too late, as I see somebody rush off into the forest. I go back and I can see that they've stolen some food and things. Nothing too important, but I don't want to get in trouble with my boss, so I decide the best thing that I can do is basically just hide the evidence. You didn't have to try hard to do this because it was an old store and nothing was really audited. So all that meant is that you had to move some of the items around, putting different ones behind it, and it looked like nothing had vanished. So I do this and try and calm myself down. Not too later, I hear another sound. My heart drops as I go to see what it is. It's a truck. I feel so relieved to see a normal person. They say hi. I need to get some gas. I say sure, certainly. And I go and get the pump to work for them. They say, are you alright? And I say, yeah, fine. Maybe it's because of the caffeine and me being scared prior, but I'm overly eager to help them, and I think they actually found me a little bit weird and were kind of put off. I say, no, I'm just here to help you, as they kind of hesitate for a bit. So now I've become the weirdo in this situation. They then say to me, hey, I saw someone walking down the side of the road. I don't know if they needed help or what. I say that's weird, and say what were they wearing? They said they don't know. I don't know how you can't possibly know that if you've noticed somebody, but they really seem to not have an idea, as they go back into their truck and drive off. Seeing that drive off was literally like watching my last sunset. A wave of emotions were going through my body, and I didn't like any of them. Suddenly it felt much colder, and the snow seems to pick up almost instantly, or more rather I suddenly notice it and become more aware. Maybe that's the fear setting in, I don't know. I just take a deep breath out, then turn back to go back inside. I tell myself, you gotta calm down, you're gonna scare them off now. I'm basically trying to stop a catalyst effect now, because I find that when I get scared I can panic, and that makes everything worse. So I just keep on working the till and try and act like nothing has happened. So I do this, and what do you know? Another dream. I drift off, but this time I have a strange dream. I'm walking through the forest now. Everything seems so cold and still. Snow is everywhere around me, but not directly where I am currently. The air feels very cold and I notice my breath. As I'm walking through the forest, I see something or someone. Every so often I turn a corner and I'll see them for a literal flash and then they disappear. Also, there's some kind of alarm going off at the same time. It kind of sounds like a warning, but I don't know what it's to, and it's slowly getting louder and louder. I go to look around and I realise that my vision's blurry. It's almost like somebody smudged the top of my eyes, but it stays in place when my eyes don't. Now, as I go on, I feel more and more nervous and I feel like I'm being stalked. Suddenly, everything stops and starts going backwards, and I can feel that I'm being dragged away by something. My vision stops again, then it all goes black. I wake up now very quickly, basically in the midst of a heart attack, my mind not knowing what's real and what's a dream. Calm down, I say to myself. And then I'm in my dream again. I can see two figures up ahead of me. They're wandering around looking at blood on the floor. This is really weird. I can hear alarms now, but they're different. I'm walking around and nobody seems to notice that I'm there. The blood, I just can't get over the blood. It's really weird. It was almost like I was a silent observer to something horrible, but I didn't know to who or what had happened. Now, I go across a bridge which is covered in snow. I don't feel the cold or anything, and I make my way back in. I go into a white room, then everything goes black again and I'm awoken. I hear banging on the door. It's my colleague. I jump up really quickly and I say hey, rush in to let them in. I've come to my senses extremely quickly now. They say, gosh, what happened? You seem really shook up. And I said that, well, I had a bad dream, and I take a while to calm myself down. They say, go home, man, you look like you really need some rest. And then I say, well, the night shifts get to me, and I don't really mention too much else. I do say that I thought I saw something paranormal, and he says, alright man, you're probably dreaming. He really doesn't listen to me, but I then explain that I'm pretty sure that I've seen that guy that the girls are all scared of. I then explain roughly what they were wearing and the direction that they went in, and my colleague seems absolutely in a state of dismay. God, I thought it was all a lie and now you're telling me this? And swore. I say, yeah, just be careful bro, honestly, it's really weird. Then I get into my car and start up the engine. I took a while just to calm myself down and think, you know what, I probably just need a good rest and this is all nothing. The problem is too, I'm only about 1 day away from having to start my other job. Now I didn't like driving at night, especially not when I was tired, but I almost went into a trance or something and kind of just gotten on with it. I remember driving through the snowy hills as I'm on my way home, and I can't stop thinking about my experiences that night. I think maybe I was just really sleepy and I merged dreams with reality, but it didn't feel like it. There was something about the emotions which I was feeling during the times that I was definitely awake, of which were too powerful and sobering. I'm never somebody to confuse dreams with reality too, so I knew the chances of this being the case were very remote at their very best. Still, there was definitely something odd. I realised too that I wasn't driving very safe either, because I was constantly looking on either side of the road trying to see if there was anybody walking past. I was convinced that I was going to run into the ghost of the person in the car crash. I was maybe going to end up as that ghost too, I thought, and I started to slow down a little bit. I was actually gripping the steering wheel so hard on the drive home that all of my knuckles have gone white, and I really struggled to move my fingers. I get in and basically collapsed, and I probably had the best night of my sleep ever that day. I think my body just decided to go into some kind of coma state to recover. I remembered when I woke up though, I felt ever so drained and just kind of weird. Maybe my brain was fried from what had happened, but it was a nice day and the sun was actually shining. I took a look around and I can see some snow falling too. It's the only time that I've ever been able to see some of the sun and snow at the same time, which I thought was really bizarre. It wasn't heavy snowfall or anything, but it was weird. I then start to hear an alarm sound again. It kind of sounds like when there's a dangerous gas alarm, or maybe from a radiation counter thing, like the modern ones, but it was really weird. I then step outside and realise that it's one of my neighbour's house alarms. He comes out with his gun saying, hey, and for a second aims it at me and I say, gosh, what are you doing? It's me. It's me, it's me. And he then lowers his weapon and says, sorry, someone just tried to break in. They were heading your way. I say, what? He says, yeah, I think they were trying to rob you or something. It's really weird. He rushes around and all we can find is footprints. We look at each other and realise that we need to follow these. I go quickly to grab my coat. I've still got my knife in my pocket from before and a flashlight. The sun started to fade away now, and it's a little bit late in the evening, so darkness is upon us. So we head out there, following these tracks, talking about who it could have been. My neighbour was in a bit of state. Simon kept saying, God, I'm gonna kill them. I'm gonna kill them. I'm gonna kill them. God, I need to kill these. And I tell him to calm down. And why is he so angry? It's just a break-in. It's not the first time one's happened around here, but he said no. I'm telling you, something was off this time. There was something wrong about this, I can sense it. I was actually a little bit worried about him too. I thought, well, I don't really like the fact that I've brought a knife to this gunfight, if it comes down to it. But we continue on. Now we're following the footsteps, and this is the first thing that I really can't explain. It seems like they're constantly getting further away, yet they're incredibly fresh. But there's no one there. I mean, what's especially weird is that you would think from how fresh they were, on your horizon you should be able to see someone. But we would see the tracks stop, and as soon as we got a bit further up, it would continue going, and we were basically never getting any closer to them. We keep going deeper and deeper into the woods, and the whole time I'm starting to feel quite uneasy with this all. There was also a mist which picked up at about the same time, which makes the whole thing much more horrible, to be honest. Now, no excuses to be weak or scared. I had quite a lot of energy, to be honest, because I wasn't as tired as before, so I used this to try and motivate myself to be more brave and actually take the lead. We've probably been doing this for almost half an hour when I say, come on, Simon, stop. This is what, Brian? So let's just turn back. This is getting dangerous now, as we realise that we're going further and further into the forest, seemingly having absolutely no gain on this person. We could just see the footprints, which seem pretty large. He says, yeah, you're right. Silence actually washes over us for a few seconds as we look at each other. We're both actually quite nervous now, as we realise that we shouldn't have really done this, so we start heading back. I take one last second to look over my shoulder. I have the feeling again, the same one from being on the gas station, but I try and push it aside, and we start walking off ahead. Now my friend's taking the lead, Simon. He's actually walking much quicker than me, and it's the first fear that I've detected in him. To be honest, he has guns, so I don't really know why he's scared. The guy with the little flimsy pocket knife was being the brave one, but hey, I'll take it. On the walk back, it's starting to get dark now, and we realise that this is a really stupid idea. I don't want to be stuck out here. The problem is too, you know what? The next day, I had to do my job in the forest. I was really picking up more and more bad memories from being out here in the cold, and I was worried that it was going to start traumatizing me a little bit. So I decided just to distract myself. Yeah, I've always been good at that. If ever there's something painful or discomforting going on, if I distract myself, I can really take myself out of the moment and not feel too bad. My mind is now desperately searching for the next question, and before I knew it, we were back. He shook my hand and said, well, see you, Brian. I say, well, bye, Simon, and I go into my house. There's not much for me to do when I get in, so I make myself a TV dinner, watch some TV, and start to relax a little bit. I start to watch the local news channels a little bit, trying to see if there's any weird suspicious activity. I don't know, aliens, anything to explain this, but nothing. Not a break-in. All is normal. It's cool, whatever. I turn off the TV and I go to my bed and start trying to sleep. I have a very comfortable bed and I've actually got a heated under mattress, so this thing is absolutely lovely to fall asleep on. Again, I have a lovely sleep. Honestly, I wish I'd done this every week and had something chaotic kick off, because it's only then that I seem to get some real good shut-eye. So I wake up in the morning, and I wake up suspiciously early. I'm always paranoid that I missed my alarm, so I go and check it quickly, but luckily I hadn't. Great. I actually decided to try and leave sooner than normal this time. I want to try and beat any potential traffic, or just anything that could make me late. I'm one who doesn't like tardiness, so I was especially trying to avoid it today. I thought maybe I could burn off some energy from doing that too. So I start driving, and I'm just about to pull into my work, and I see someone by the side of the road sitting. I try and look back, but I've already rounded the corner by then, and I wonder whether it's actually a person or maybe some kind of snowman that somebody's made and decided to throw a jacket on. So I go inside where the small gift shop is. It's not really a gift shop, it's more like a cafe, but they have some handmade things in there. I say hey to the lady that works on the till. She's been there for ages, and she said she looked tired. I say thank you sarcastically, and go over to my desk. Emails. There's probably about 60 that I have to reply to. They really accumulate, but it's basically just saying what jobs and tasks I need to do. I have a habit of printing them out and bringing them like an itinerary. Trees that have fallen, things that have gone missing, things that I need to repair. I sigh it as I'm going to have to bring some heavy equipment with me as I go out there. Also, I wasn't finishing too late into the night, but I was going to have to be out there while it was a bit dark. They actually did this so we wouldn't have visitors there at the same time as we're repairing things, which I think is really silly. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Who's not going to come here because they're actually maintaining it? What do they think? Some freaking aliens come down and do all the work, as if by magic, or there's some kind of invisible helpers? I don't know. I sure wish there were though. So I go out. I was the only one working there at the time, and that's something I didn't like too. It meant that I had more work to do, and it also meant that in the previous shift it was the same. They kind of staggered our shift patterns, so it meant that they might not have done everything. I always preferred having someone to speak to too while I was out there. Now I head out and I have to come across a wooden bridge. There's quite a lot of these around. They're pretty cool, but I never trust being on them. I know they're meant to be built well, but I just don't trust them for some reason. So I start making my way across the bridge when I suddenly see that there's some footsteps here. Now the footsteps continue on the path that I'm going on, and that gives me chills. It's literally the only time that I've ever seen footsteps like this before. Visitors rarely actually use this because the main place that looks pretty cool, that's quite far from here. And I'm on a maintenance route now, so why is anybody up here? To be fair, I have seen people here before, and they just use it to pass through basically, and that's fine. But not today, it just felt weird. So I go over and start doing some maintenance work on one of the trees that I had to clear up. Someone's really had a go at this thing. They basically tore down lots of branches and stuff, and that annoyed me. I don't know why, it just really got to me that day. I start to get more and more frustrated and start calling out, saying, why can't people just respect this place for what it is? Then I realise that it's probably given me a job, so I quickly be quiet. I then hear somebody laugh. It was only for a second, but kind of like a quick ha. It's in a really weird pitch, starting high then ending low, followed by some weird exhalation. I realise nobody's out here, so I think maybe it was some kind of animal. I don't know if anybody knows any kinds of animals that can make laughing sounds, but if you do, let me know in the comments, because I sure hadn't heard of it before. So I continue my work. As I'm doing so, I do realise weird things. Every so often when I put my tools down, something seemingly goes missing or becomes displaced. It's like I'm losing my mind a bit. I could put down maybe a drill or something, then turn back and it's moved, 3 feet to the left, I just tell myself, Brian, you're doing okay. It doesn't matter if you lose it. So I calm myself. I then hear what sounds like laughter again. I'm really confused now. I turn very slowly and pivot on my heels. It kind of sounds like a pig laughing, if that makes sense. Kind of like the grunting sound they made. This goes on for a few seconds and I think, well, maybe it's some kind of boar, but we don't get them here. It certainly wasn't a farm pig too, so I can't figure out what it is. It seems like it's only when I'm confused as to where my tools have went that I actually hear this sound. And that again's quite annoying. It's mocking me, but how could it possibly mock me out here? I can then see movement further ahead, and I realise that somebody is on the trail, but they're doing a good job to stay out of sight, it seems. Again, this casts a lot of doubt into my mind. I don't know. This could be anyone. But I quickly finish up what I'm doing, and I'm able to head back to the station. From getting back to the station, I do an count of all my tools and I realise that some are missing. Ah, that's great. Tell me what that means. You guessed it, I'm gonna have to go back out there and face whatever this is alone. I'm not sure if somebody's actively stealing from me though. It seems kind of like a very low probability out here. So I just slowly head out, again with my knife. This time I brought another screwdriver with me so I can try and stab someone. I don't really have much faith in my pocket knife being able to defend me, so I thought the screwdriver's gonna have to make up for it. Now, I eventually do find my screwdriver, but it seems like it has moved, and some of my other tools that I was missing. Again, why on earth have these things moved? I just don't get it. I collect them all and quickly head back in. I get through my emails and I realise there's none more. There's basically nothing left for me to do and I start to relax now. I felt really good. I put the heating on and just grabbed some of my reading things. If you get finished early, you don't really have to do anything. Annoyingly, there's like a clock in and clock out system, so they're basically going to be on the dot regardless, so you can't always go home unless one of your friends signs for you. But none of them were working there today. So I just make myself at home and try and relax to the best of my abilities. Now in these circumstances it is pretty hard, but it doesn't take too long and I quickly forget about what happened to me. All is well, and it comes around to almost 12. Well, to be precise, it was 1:45. I then get up to see if my other colleague has come. He usually arrives early where he does the night watch. He doesn't actually go out or do anything, he just sits there, but he's cool. I don't see him though, which again is odd because usually he's always there early, so I think that's bizarre. I then hear a scream sound. Only for about 2 seconds, but it kind of puts me into a state of paralysis. I basically just froze there watching what's happening, which luckily turned out to be nothing. Okay, that's great. Well, it could just be a fox or animal. We don't get Arctic foxes, but there's similar things out here, and I think maybe it's one of them. Ah, that's it. One was injured, and maybe it thought my tools were food or something. It sounds silly thinking of it now, but at the time I thought that was a great idea. I solved it, and I'm suddenly very merry. And my colleague arrives, I say hey, and we just spoke for a while. I think both of us actually appreciated having the company, so we just sat there talking for about a good hour or so. He's really excited to become a Marine, and we're just talking about that for a while. I then said about my future plans to make some companies. I knew that I was going to have to change jobs because I wasn't going to be able to get the time and resources to do it with what I was currently doing. Also, I felt tired all the time. I noticed more and more that I'd just be more willing to sleep after work, and that wasn't really a good thing because nothing gets done then, or if you do things you just feel like all of your time's gone on to working, which also isn't nice. So I don't know. I felt a little bit down at this point, but as always, I can be resilient, so yeah, that's what I do. But anyway, after explaining this to him, he says thank you and we say our goodbyes. I think he needed kind of the pep talk and needed to learn about resilience, so he really appreciated it. So I get into my car and start driving back. Now my car feels cold and doesn't respond well. It's a car that doesn't always do too well in the snow, but that was fine. I was going to drive more slowly now. I hated to drive in the snow. I loved how peaceful and quiet it was in the roads, but the cars didn't always have ABS or whatever you call it, so the tyres could basically lock up while you were driving. This actually happens to me a few times, and I have to kind of tap on the brakes. It's a weird technique I picked up. Actually, when I changed cars, I still adopted this, and I stupidly put myself in danger because of it. Now I make it back home, and I realise there's footprints everywhere. They're all around my house, and even my neighbour's one. So again, I think maybe somebody's trying to get in. I quickly rush inside, have my knife ready, but I can't see anybody or anything. I quickly go over to Simon and ask him if he's seen anything, but Simon hasn't. He seems like he's just woken up and says, "Nah man, I don't think there's anything." He comes to me in his briefs, and that's a memory that I'm never going to forget anyway. So he goes back to sleep. Don't know why he wasn't embarrassed by it, or I didn't put clothes on to get to the door, but I guess I'll never know. So I settle in, get into my routine, and my mum calls. My mum was always worried about me and did a really good job of checking up. My parents actually split up and I didn't have much contact with my father, so it was always nice when I got a call of her. So we talk for quite a while, then eventually I say I have to go to sleep for my shift, and we say our good nights and I settle in. So I wake up the next day and everything's normal. The snow this time is much more heavier though. I was actually really hoping that I was going to get a call off of the guys to say that I haven't got to bother coming in, but unfortunately it didn't happen. I mean, it literally never happened while I was there, but I heard stories of it happening before. It's not like school, unfortunately, but maybe it will change one day. So I get in my car, and again, I'm driving as cautious as I possibly can, because I know how easily that my car goes off the road if I'm not careful. And that starts happening. I get really close to going off the road and kind of end up in a ditch, and I think, great. The funny thing was, I was only about 30 meters from my actual job and workplace, but my car decided to give out then. I tried quite a few times to get it out, and decided just to wait for a while. I realised then that I can get some boiling water and basically free my car if I can do the walk, so I do that. I say hey to my buddy, and he says that he's going to help me out. He's kind of like one of those Labrador dogs, the golden retrievers, the wonder dog which wants to be your best friend and always help you. So I was very happy with this. We threw some boiling water down, and luckily it frees up my car. I couldn't believe how well it worked actually. So that's something that I've always remembered since. So what do? We get into my car and I drive him back. I then make a joke about charging him for the trip, but he goes over his head somehow. I really don't know how. I then start explaining the joke and just give up on him trying to understand it and say no, don't worry about it. He says, "Oh yeah, huh," and finally gets it. I look at him like he's really weird. Now, I get in there and I check the emails. He says, "You're not gonna like this." I say, "What's that?" He says, "Well, I'm pretty sure last night that I heard someone out there. I definitely saw them. Someone was lurking around and I thought they were in trouble, you know. I went out there and tried to hunt them down, seeing if they needed anything. But it's like they would just run from me." I say, "What do you mean?" They say, "I don't know if there's forest people out there or what, but they wouldn't come near me," in the southern accent that he had. He actually grew up on a ranch somewhere, and he said that He had a good idea and good feel with people, and that person just didn't feel right. I think, well, at least I'm in the daytime now. I don't really care, to be honest. If this happened in the nighttime, I'd be like, yeah, sure, let's call the cops and everything. Now, I'm a little bit annoyed to say this, but I really didn't care. I just thought, well, it's the daytime. I'm not that small of a guy. Maybe I could handle myself. Who knows? Not like I could fight, but I should be alright. And I trusted myself to be able to run off. Yes, a great instinct, a warrior's will. But yeah. He then says that he's actually going to stick around for me, which I really appreciated. It was kind of like returning the favour of me helping out the other night and having those conversations with him. He starts talking about the ranch where he's from and saying how much he loved it. I asked him why he liked it so much, and he said he kind of felt like a real life cowboy. He would do the cattle handling and things like that and working to tame the horses, and I thought that was really cool. He even said they had donkeys out there, and I started to clown him for it. He then mentions to me that he's going to head over to a 7-Eleven or Walmart, and if I wanted anything. I say no, that's fine, don't worry. I did really appreciate it though. He was literally offering to drive away from work and then come back to give me supplies. I didn't have any other friends that good there, so I thought that was really cool. I then checked the emails and I have to go and repair something. It's a part of the bridge. I wasn't sure, but it seemed to be the same one where I thought I saw the footprints or the person walking, so I was already a little bit hesitant to be out there. I then step out and just make my way there. Now, because of the clouds and the heavy snowfall, it actually looks kind of dark. You can actually see quite well though, because maybe it was a reflection off of the white of the snow. But you seem to have pretty cool visibility, which I was happy about. So I make my way up, and I'm not too far away from the bridge. I start doing my repairing work when I notice something. I feel kind of heavy suddenly, almost lightheaded, like I'm gonna vomit. I don't know why that is. I knew it was very cold though, and I suddenly feel a bit wet, which I think is really bizarre. Then, something comes over my mouth and I hear a whisper in my ear. I know where you live. I was certain it was my colleague playing games on me, and I kind of ignored it. My head then suddenly comes back. I kind of fall a bit as I realise that somebody's pushed me. I go to get up to see what's happening, and I notice somebody running off into the forest. I get up to go after them, but I feel weird. I feel like I have absolutely no energy whatsoever to chase after them, though I am actually able to chase them for a little bit. I go to call out, but I feel like I can't do that either, and suddenly my legs go weak, and everything starts to slowly go black now, and I'm seeing little stars and feel extremely weak, almost like I've just collapsed into myself. I'm there for a little while, in this weird void, when I'm awoken again. There's bright lights and medics. I'm in an ambulance. I slowly fade in and out of consciousness, and then I wake up again in a hospital bed. I was so confused as to where I was and in so much pain. I try to move and somebody quickly tells me not to and pushes me down. I ended up going to sleep and eventually wake up again, coming round. Then I quickly find a nurse rushing over to me, trying to help me, giving me some water. I say what happened. She said, "You had surgery. You got attacked." I then look at her, really confused. I don't know whether this is a real situation or just a figure of my imagination, but hearing the beeping sound of monitors around me and realising there's other patients here suddenly sobers me up. I say, "But what happened?" She says, "Someone stabbed you while you were at work. That friend of yours called the police for you and come looking out. Couldn't figure out where you'd gone. You had to have surgery. You almost bled out." I then ask her, did I punch back? What happened? She says I don't know, you're gonna have to wait for the cops to arrive. Your friend's gonna visit soon. That's all she says that she's able to tell me. She doesn't know much else, so I'm stuck there. Absolutely in another planet. I can't believe what I'm hearing. It almost didn't feel real just coming from her, so I waited. I waited and waited for what felt like forever. Then eventually, my buddy shows up with some flowers and chocolates and some candies I loved. He comes over and hugs me and says, "Man, I didn't think you were gonna make it," with tears in his eyes. I say, "But what happened?" He said, "Well, I come back from the store and couldn't find you. I knew something was off, and I don't know, I just felt it in my soul. I went out there, and I could see that you'd went over to the bridge, and that's where I saw the weirdo. So I headed out there. I had my rifle and everything ready. I eventually found a pool of blood and a trail of blood, and you collapsed on the floor. I dragged you back into the station and called the police. They're out there searching for whoever done this to you. You got stabbed pretty bad, man. I didn't think you were gonna make it," as he starts crying again. I just hug him and I'm so grateful. I'd never been so grateful for the air that I breathed, to be able to see things and hear, and just everything, but I was in so much pain. Now the road from there was a long recovery. It took me forever, and I actually still have scar tissue there which can really hurt me to this day. I'm not quite sure whether they actually found him or not. I basically immediately moved to a different country where my parents lived and was able to sell my house. I was able to more than thank my friend for it, but it's a horrible experience. I don't know if any of what happened to me was linked with my other job, working there in the store, but I think it might have been. Now this happened in mid-November 2021, and me and about 10 friends were camping in the woods in the Sawtooth National Forest near Patio Lake. There were 2 groups of 4 people in 2 tents, and 1 in a car, and me and my buddy in the hammocks near the edge of the camp. It's about 1 AM, and we'd all been sleeping for about 2 hours. I was awake up in my hammock. I can hear my camping mate panting extremely heavily and yelling my name. I was so confused and get up and help him. He was paralyzed by fear, saying that he had an extremely vivid dream of a black figure which is tall and slender trying to sneak up into his car, and he'd seen this figure decapitate me and the rest of his friends. He said that when he woke up, the figure was near the car and saw all of our heads on sticks throughout the campsite. He then proceeds. He said it actually clicks the alarm button on the car, but this makes it run around and dash off into the woods very quickly. I'm obviously really freaked out by this point and felt uneasy, but I told him that it's just a bad dream and that he needs to go back to sleep. Now him and I had tried for about 5 minutes, but were both completely stricken with fear. And at this point we hear our friend yelling, "No, don't take me." Now side note, we had not awoken anybody else in the camp at this point. This freaked me out, and my buddy quite a bit, since we had no idea what was going on. We were also very vulnerable in our hammocks by ourselves, and the edge of our camp is about 50 yards away, where the forest starts. One of the buddies then starts to yell out really loud, and we find the friend in the car. Apparently they're still awake, and we hear the alarm sound. All of us are scared and have a conversation about what's going on, and the buddy in the car said that he heard scratching on the windows and heard something pulling on the door. He also said that he'd seen a black figure running around the car. We're all freaked out at this point and decided to move on. Our friend with the dream also claimed a similar murder story to the friend in the hammock. The next morning, we all talked, and so many of us experienced what happened that night, literally 6 in total, that We deemed it as some kind of weird thing going on. We think it's a Wendigo, but we have no idea. Also, we had friends that stayed at the same site about 6 months later and noticed weird things happening, and everyone being sure that they heard or saw somebody walking around the tents at night. What could it have been? Now, I'm a hunter, and I like to hunt wild boar specifically, though I've been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, but I mostly hunt boar. For those of you who don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat everything and anything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large animals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar or coyote. Now, I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope costs literally twice as much as a rifle that I'm mounting it on, and how it's worth it, but I did. I then took my rifle to arrange and do some range finding. There was an area that is peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up in, and it overlooked a large area which is easy to navigate with a clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I'm a little impatient. I'd actually spotted quite a lot of deer, but it was out of the season, and it wouldn't be legal for me to hunt them. I then moved to another spot that I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot wasn't much of one that had animal activity. No owls or rabbits. The deer that I'd seen was hundreds of yards away from me. Why was this pocket of land so dead and lonely at night, but so lively in the day? I'd set up at 2 PM and it's now like 2 AM when I started to think about packing up. Maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I then heard a crunch from the direction I came in. I pan my scope over and see the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white one, but similar to what you see in the Predator movie. I adjust my range and zoomed in a little. I remembered jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It's a man, because he was so low and hunched over that I thought it was a young bear. Maybe it's a game warden. I couldn't be sure. I would have really been able to see headlights coming up from over the road where I am, and maybe where he walked from. By the way, I'm about 30 miles away from anything. I was about to call out when I adjust my sights and notice that he's not wearing clothes. I remembered being disturbed by the movements. It's almost moving like a squirrel, twitchy and grabbing at foliage, sniffing around the trees. Was that my tree? No. Was this the one that I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought absolutely terrified me. I still have nightmares about it now. He then squatted and places his hands in the dirt, and then stood up and howled like a dog. And it was really horrifying. Then I hear a companion female voice saying, "Help, I'm lost." There was a long pause. Neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It was against everything I was taught. Were they lost? Was this some crazy guy? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help me please, I can't walk," the voice called out. That's when I realized something's off. He could walk. When I first saw him, he was traversing the land, with so much ease that I actually mistook him for a bear. It's a trap. This guy's trying to lure me out there. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sit-in pad, but I didn't care. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he's in the same position, but his face is now staring in the direction that I am, and I'm sure I can see a smile. The thermal scope had an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. But how did he hear me get up and get my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. I screamed at him to go away. He then stood up, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. 6 feet but very lean. He took a couple of strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but hadn't really threatened me. What was I to tell the cops? I was unwilling, but I'm ready to shoot someone. He then stops dead in his tracks on all fours. The next one will get you, go away, I said. He strays on all fours. I had my sights trained on him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling, and knew that my voice has cracked a little on my last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he then bolted towards a tree line and the opposite road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he's so quick. He then disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing in his direction. I racked for another round, and tried to pocket that mag, and swap it for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I'm not far away from the truck, and I want to get out of there. I could hear in the distance him yelling in a weird sound that might have been a laugh or cry. I scrambled up the trail, and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from my perspective, and lots of people say, oh, it's probably just a weirdo out there on drugs or a caveman or something. But I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone, never giving me an update. It wasn't until I told this story on a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes and skinwalkers. My story actually scares the life out of him because how similar it is to the things that he was describing to me. I kind of feel like I dodged a bullet that night. I'm really glad I was armed that day. So it's the eve of Halloween one night, and we're doing some trick-or-treating. Me and my brother are heading out to meet up with a larger group of friends. It's not too close to nightfall, but it's pretty cool. The leaves were all beautiful orange colour. Everything had some interesting kind of saturation to it in terms of the nature and whatnot. It looked almost like we're in a Halloween film. The place was well and truly beautiful. So we walk through the forest, which is the only way that we can actually get to our friends. Annoyingly, we live on the side of the town where all of our friends are on the opposite. It wasn't too much of an issue, it just basically become a pain, but it didn't matter. What did matter though? It began raining not very long after we set out. We think, gosh, this is going to be a fun journey. There's basically pools of water in the middle everywhere. It didn't add to the ambience of Halloween this time, it kind of just made it a bit miserable. The thing that's annoying too is we also started ruining our costumes because of the rain. But we knew if we could get out of the forest it was going to be a lot better. So we're continuing our walk. We're probably about halfway through the woods when we come up to one crossing, and my brother, I don't know how he did it, but he almost falls straight into the water below. I tell him not to and how stupid it is, and we almost had an argument. It seems like this Halloween's going to be an absolute nightmare, but we decided to persevere and keep going. Now we keep on walking until eventually we finally come through to the other side. We keep on saying how annoying it is where our parents live, but it doesn't matter now. We're close to the lake where the houses start where the other friends live. The rain's actually casting some kind of mist onto the lake, and it looks especially eerie. It honestly was picture perfect for a Halloween night, cold, rainy in October. We actually can't see any other trick-or-treaters out. We start to think that maybe everybody else has went inside because of the weather, so that was good for us though. It means that we're probably going to have a better time out of here and more houses to hit up. We had a look around and check out our neighbours' decorations. It was a few pumpkins and stuff, but nothing too interesting. Now we go over to our friends, and only one of them actually decides to join us. Now this friend, Scott, is probably the wild card out of the friends group. He's never satisfied with what we're actually doing, and he always wants us to do more. He also had stupid ideas about things as well, but it didn't matter. We were just glad that we weren't on our own out here. So we get our things and head off with him. Now the first couple of houses that we go to don't really have much of anything. It turned out that we're out here for probably about an hour or so before we get bored. All of the houses that we can actually go to on the street have now been easily raided. We've actually got a fair amount of candy, and we're not exactly sure what we can do next. I mean, it actually become quite boring to be honest. So we have a look around and ask Scott what to do. Now this is probably a bad idea, but he has something interesting. Apparently, not too far away, he actually knows where a really creepy house is, where apparently people only live in there sometimes and they're always the craziest of crazy. Now that sounds like something that I really want to do, and for whatever stupid reason we say yeah, that's a great plan, and we let Scott lead the way. Now immediately we start heading into a part of the forest that's far away from any kind of path or civilization. It's not too dark, but it's getting there, and we walk further and further on fallen leaves. All you can hear is the sludgy, squishy steps of where we're going. We do ask him if he's actually leading us out here, or if he's just messing with us, because that's the kind of thing he'd do. But he insists, no, this is honestly the right way, I'm telling you. I come here with my older brother, I remember it. Then eventually we come up to the spot, and there it is. A really creepy looking abandoned old cabin. He says, wait, this isn't it. I don't know what this is. We then ask him what does he mean. He says, no, it's bigger than this, it doesn't look like this. Me and my brother look at each other and kind of half started laughing, thinking, oh yeah, here we go. He says, no, there's more than this. But you guys want to check it out anyway. So we agree to go ahead. There's a small stream separating us from it, so we have to kind of balance upon a log to get across. Scott stupidly runs and jumps across and gets really wet, but he doesn't care. Now we go up to the cabin, and this place smelled pretty bad. We get in there, and there's some old kind of equipment. We don't know what it was used for, but it looked really creepy. Everything was really rusty. I mean, I'd have to say it was probably about 100 years old, or at least 70. To us that was artifacts, honestly. We think this is quite creepy, but it wasn't very big, so we get bored quickly. He says, come on, let me show you. He then acts like he knows where he's going, but it's absolutely apparent he doesn't. We're now straying further and further into the woods, with only one of us claiming to have a sense of direction. But the thing is, you know what made it okay? We have a pretty good supply of candy now, so we're not bothered. I'd actually eaten half of mine and I start to get a stomach ache. I start saying, come on guys, let's just hurry up. I need to get back. I explain what's wrong, and my brother grabs the rest of my candy and keeps on eating it. We go a little bit further up, then finally we see it. A house. This thing looks really creepy. It's like a big old Victorian style house which has obviously been abandoned long ago. I'm a little hesitant but somewhat excited. I actually decided to lead the way just to show that I was brave. Now, I ended up dropping my bag down that had the remaining candy, but I didn't care. There wasn't much in there. Probably wasn't smart for the environment, but I was young, so whatever. Now, I get further up ahead, and then a crow bursts out of one of the rooms. "This is awesome," we say. "We've never seen anything like this before." There's all kind of rocks laid around too, which almost look like some kind of gravestones. They obviously weren't, but they really look like it. I think I can see a pumpkin too, but after not long I realise that this is just some old bag up there, and I laugh to myself. We come face to face with it now, and Scott decides to take the lead. He says trick or treat really loud, and me and my brother look at each other. Well, great, they definitely know that we're here now, so we might as well just proceed. We wait and we don't hear anything, just the odd crackle of lightning in the distance. Again, we shout out trick or treat and don't hear a thing. Well, we might as well make ourselves welcome then, boys. As he opens the door, we say, "God, you can't do that." He says, "Why not? No one's here, it's a free home." He then opens the door and says, "Oh, go away, kids," and pretends he was a homeowner. And I take my first step inside. I hadn't been in an abandoned place before, really. Not to this scale, and it was definitely creepy. There was a really bad smell in there, and I just presumed it was what old buildings smelled like. I actually went to vomit a few times. Now we decide that we're going to search the place. Now my brother and Scott decide to search around downstairs. I for some reason wanted to see what was up there. I thought, well, maybe if I go high enough up, I can have a look around and see what else is out there and figure out at least where we are. So I start doing this. With each creak of the steps though, my confidence grows less and less bold. Now I say hello, and I'm sure I can hear a door creak open. Now that was just like something out of a horror movie for me, and I go down. I then wait at the bottom of the stairs for my brother or Scott to join me. After not too long they both do. Scott's got some kind of jarred pickled God knows what that is picked up off the side. I tell him stop, put it down, it could make you unwell, and he quickly drops it. It cracked open. As this happens, I'm sure we hear some kind of movement or something, but only it sounds like it's from outside. We then start going further upstairs. I'm in the lead now, but confident with the others here. They decide to look round, and there's a perfectly preserved bedroom. I mean, it was fairly dilapidated, but it was there. It looked like you could even sleep in it if you wanted. Okay, that's weird. Now, I did actually need the bathroom genuinely at this point. I thought, well, I might as well just go here. So I turn and look for the bathroom. I found the toilet and I actually used it. After I finished my urinating, I turn around and I can't stop looking towards where the bath is. Something was just really drawing me towards it. There was an awful smell coming from it. I decided to slowly have a look. I put my hand on the railing and it felt kind of sticky and disgusting. I then draw the curtain slightly and I can see the remains of something's head, and it looks like it's a person's. I scream and lurch back. I hear my brother scream too. They quickly burst in to see what I was looking at, and they equally scream as loud as me. We all turn and bolt it down the stairs. What's really weird too is we've realised that the door's now closed, which we definitely left open. We say, "You've got to run, you've got to run." Scott says, "What's that? What's that?" And we turn around and there's some kind of movement outside that we can see through the windows. It looks like at least one person lurking about. We're sprinting with Scott in the lead now, trying desperately to get some distance between us and that place. I'm pretty sure that I've just stumbled across a body or something. We run and eventually stop to catch our breaths again. I say, "What was that? What was that?" as I'm washing my hands in the stream. We're all very scared and decide to bolt off now. Scott says, "Sorry guys, I gotta go." And he quickly runs off back home. Me and my brother look at each other as if to say, what on earth are we meant to do now? Kind of panicking a bit more. We have to go through the same woods again to try and get home, or at least we thought it was the same ones. We start walking through the woods and we're honestly so scared at this point. I've never seen my brother look so scared, and this is the first time for me, so it's definitely creepy. I keep saying, what was that? What do you think that was? And he says, just don't ask, dude, let's get home. Now the raining's stopped now, which is one good thing, but we're constantly looking around. I'm sure that I can hear movement, and every so often I see a silhouette further from the direction of the house moving through the tree line, every so often breaking the small light which remained. Now this goes on for another 10 minutes before we're out of there, and we're able to turn back onto our street again. There were some other people out trick-or-treating, and that actually makes us feel a lot more confident now and starts to calm us down. Now everybody looks at us too, they can tell that we've seen something, but I don't know. Our energy was just different. We went home and decided we couldn't tell our mum and dad about it because we're going to get grounded and in so much trouble. Now it turned out quite a number of years later that apparently there was a crazy person out there. He would actually murder animals on a regular basis and keep them in his bath to decompose. What I stumbled upon was where he lived. Law enforcement only found out about this long after he abandoned the setup, so that means that we were probably there just after it had happened and when he was lurking. Now this was about 10 years ago with my boyfriend, who is now my husband, in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. His mum is a big-time hiker and was part of a hiking club that got awesome discounts on these very rustic cabins run by the state park. We decided to spend a weekend at one of them. The hike wasn't super far, probably a mile or so. The cabin's very bare bones. It had a deck off the back, so we're hanging out there when we heard it. To this day, the strangest thing, and it's so hard to describe, the sound was like somebody dropping something like a basketball. Thumps that become progressively closer and louder together. Like when a bat gets close to the ground. The weirdest part of the sensation is that it seemed to vibrate from below or inside of us. The first time it happened, we're pretty weirded out but thought that maybe there was something underneath the deck or house that was being weird. But it would become so powerful and prevalent that we actually get scared and run back inside. Nobody ever talked to us about it or described anything similar. It was really one of the strangest things that I ever encountered before. I hiked the AT in 16 northbound. The scariest things mostly included running out of water and into black bears. In places where people day hike or sections hike a lot, you get silly people that actually feed the bears. They're usually running away from you, but the fed bear actually associates humans with food. So my scariest experience was waking up to having a black bear sniffing around my tent one night. The scariest thing that happened to me while on the Appalachian trails is that one night I fell asleep and woken up to the sound of my tent being opened. I screamed, "What the heck?" and someone startled jumped back. They said, "Oh sorry, I thought this was my tent, I'm so sorry," and disappeared into the night, but I have no idea who they were or where they actually went. I can only presume it was somebody up to no good, because it wouldn't have made sense that they pretended they just stumbled upon my tent thinking it was their own if they were literally nowhere to be found afterwards. Clearly they're up to no good. About 20 years after I graduated high school, I used to run traps to make some extra money in the winter time. Since I was pregnant with my daughter, any sort of extra income was necessary, since trapping is frowned upon oddly. Anyway, My father had always told me about the creek I trapped in as being quite strange. We'd pretty much always walk the creek and collect arrowheads and look for other relics. So he would tell me stories about the Native American tribes there and their history and its folklore. It was a very special spot to us, so I began trapping, and my father would tell me to have respect for the wildlife, don't litter, kill inhumanely, and just don't kill unnecessarily. So I built a great deal of appreciation of life, which led to my career in conservation. The only reason I stated these things is to build context as to what I did. About once a week, while I was walking up the creek, I would hear whistling, like a human but in random patterns, and that would be with the smell of sulfur and rotten eggs, which my dad told me was mostly like a Bigfoot or skunk ape, and sightings had occurred as long as he could remember in our area. Then one time, I was scanning down the tree line with my binoculars to check to see if I had seen any coyotes or foxes in the traps. I see something weird, a fairly familiar medium-sized tree swaying back and forth. So I'm there with my .22 hoping to sneak up on a bobcat or any animal that was medium-sized that I can kill with a headshot. About 3/4 of the way to the tree line, the swaying stopped. I didn't see anything, but at least two of whatever it was began whistling and whooping further back in the forest. I continued to head up the creek, and it always stayed somewhat behind me at a distance but never left. That was fairly interesting. Then one day, sadly, an oil fracking company purchased the land. They still gave me permission to trap, but they had a few accidents where the water got so nasty that it killed everything. It broke my heart to see everything going down there. But after they had installed their rigs and cleared some of the forest, it seems to get hostile. One day running traps, I realised that all of my traps had been ruined, bent or broken, and the remaining animals I caught were either stolen, ripped from the trap, or not there. I was confused by this. Now, I found a coyote that was messed up so bad, fur torn, broken lower jaw, and head beaten. I felt like this was in retaliation to what the oil company had done, and I was being blamed, so it was weird. But it is positive. A few months afterwards, I would go to the store twice a week to buy a variety of apples, pears, a mixture of meat from carcasses I'd skinned. I put them in a basket and leave it in the forest, hoping whatever it was would get it before anything else. Sometimes the basket would disappear, but always in 2 days, everything was gone. One day, I believe it was leaving me a present in return. When I returned where I dropped off the basket, there was about 100 plus small sticks very neatly laid across the floor, and a deer antler and 20 acorns. I do hope that I did help this creature, though it might have been a Bigfoot or something. I don't know. I never physically seen it, but it was definitely weird because the area was so isolated. Still to this day, 20 years later, I think of it time to time, and I don't see a reasonable person being there. For some background, I live in California, in a major metropolitan area, no forested area or anything like that. My neighborhood is behind a fairly sketchy strip mall, the ones where most of the shops are always closed or boarded up, and the ones that are open are fronts for something. So one evening, I was coming home late from work, about 11 or so. As I was turning into my neighborhood past the woods, I noticed that one of the strip mall lights is on. Now this caught my eye, but instantly drew my attention, as I now realised that something was walking up the ramp to the front door. It was short, barely the height of the row, walked with incredibly stiff legs that didn't bend at all. It had very long arms, almost down to the knees. Unfortunately, it was all in shadow as the light was behind it, so I have no idea of the colour or anything. It gave me the creepiest feeling. If I'm outside at night, I still think about it, even months later. I'm only familiar with the common types of cryptids or whatever you call it, so I was wondering what it could have possibly been. I'm just hoping somehow it was a person, but I don't think that's possible. This happened many years ago. I lived in Maryland, a little suburb type community. My bedroom faces the road and my parents face the backyard. We lived in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so you can see a lot from my bedroom window. One night, late in the evening, I got up to use the bathroom. When I got back to bed, I heard knocking at my bedroom window. I was on the second floor, so I knew nobody should be out there. I thought it was my cat, so I rolled over and tried and sleep. Though there's more knocking, only this time there was a pattern to it, like shave and a haircut. So this is definitely not my cat now. It was from outside. My door was on the side of the room, so it wasn't anybody in there. I got out of bed and went over to my window to look outside. At the end of the street was a light post and a giant oak tree next to it. This little creature, looking like a real-life version of Danny DeVito's penguin, but not so dirty, was dancing underneath the light post. It grabbed the pole when it realised I was looking at it, and span around and jumped to the side and disappeared. It was so weird. I have no idea what it was, and I've never seen it since. I'm going to try and give as many details as possible. I live in Ohio, around Youngstown, and my family owns a cabin in PA near the Albuquerque forest. It's my grandpa's cabin. He's a retired firefighter, and years ago, he and his firefighter friends would go hunting in the forest. His friends stayed in a tree while the rest were sprayed out amongst the property in various stands. Around lunchtime, they planned to meet up and eat. Calling the friend, he wouldn't answer for anyone or reply on walkie-talkie. They decided to go and check up on him, and they found him petrified, ducking down in the tree stand. They said the trees looked like they had been snapped around with ease. He's as white as a ghost. He claimed that a large, estimated 8 feet tall humanoid creature that stunk so bad had been tearing down trees left, right and centre around the stand. So tall his head almost touched where he is. He had no idea what it was. With all his years of hunting, he's never seen anything like it. He didn't know what to think of it. This story took place in the late 90s/2000s. My dad was in the Navy, and at the time of the story, he was on leave while visiting home. This incident took place in rural Pennsylvania in a national forest. I don't know if this had any significance, but our town has a huge native history with a reservation just north of us. My dad was seeing an old friend from high school, and they were driving along one of the very empty roads surrounded by woods or in a forested area. The road was dug in a giant and very steep hill, covered in huge towering evergreen trees. As they were driving, suddenly a small black figure launches 40 feet from the upslant of the hillside and lands on the pavement in front of the car. They hadn't stopped yet. Now they're just about to hit this figure's dead corpse until, right as they're about to hit it, it springs up and jumps over the guardrail down the hillside. Apparently they both saw it, but they both sat in silence, not wanting to look crazy, until my dad's friend said, "God, what was that? Was that a monkey?" He said, "I don't know, I thought I'd seeing things." My dad said that it appeared to be like a chimp, except its fur was longer and rattier. It hung down from its arms, and it was matted and wet. He didn't get much of a glimpse though, really. A few years later, my dad then found out about something called a skunk ape, which he maintains to this day is what he saw. I've been in a long distance relationship with my girlfriend for a couple of years, and every summer and winter break I'm able to go and travel and see her. This encounter happened 2 years ago at my girlfriend's house. I should mention that my girlfriend lives on the outskirts of her city in Mexico, where houses are around 200 to 300 yards apart and surrounded by dense woods. Usually, days and nights go by peacefully, accompanied by the sound of the woods and the occasional car passing by from others who live nearby. I had always considered her place to be perfect to spend time outdoors until this occasion. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. The sighting will forever be a part of my mind. On a chilly night of December, I was at my girlfriend's house. I had planned to spend the night with her since she would have been there herself that day. Her mum was out of town and she didn't want to stay there by herself either. We were having dinner in the kitchen at around 8 p.m. We chatted about activities and could do tomorrow. Then tasked her mum and asked her what to do, how much we both missed each other, among others. After about an hour of conversation and laughs, we decided to go into the living room to watch some TV. We get up and do the dishes. She went into the bedroom and I went outside to the bathroom. The house layout consists of a long corridor that connected pretty much every room in the house and a back door at the end of a corridor which led to the patio. The patio was open, full of trees, plants, and the only thing separating the patio from the woods is a fence made up of stones and barbed wire that stood about 1 meter tall. Halfway down the patio, there was the bathroom, being lit by a single weak light bulb, so if anybody wanted to go, they had to walk outside, even if it had to be in the middle of the night. I'm not coming here, I thought. I remembered when I opened the back door and stepped into the patio, a cold breeze struck my face and sent shivers across my back, so I hurried back as quickly as possible, but to be honest, I was a little spooked going out into the darkness, knowing that the woods were pretty much only a few steps away. So I finished doing my business and washed my hands and walked back, being careful not to trip on something because the light bulb was almost non-existent. I was about halfway there when I heard a noise to my left, like somebody stepped on a branch and broke it. I stopped and quickly turned, trying to see what made the sound, but I could only see a proportion of the fence and nothing but darkness beyond that. However, I have a feeling that I'm being watched, like something was surrounding me. I stood there in silence for about 30 seconds. I listened to the surroundings, only to notice the crickets had stopped chirping. I get outside even further now, but I'm still freaked out because I don't know why I can't hear much now. I was somewhat scared to move, but did it anyways, almost running to get back inside as quick as possible. When I returned, I went to my girlfriend who's in the living room, laying down on the couch with a blanket. She noticed I was a bit agitated and says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Your patio's scary." I said it jokingly though, not wanting to scare her, because she hates anything horror related. I decided to brush it off, so I went around to the couch and sat at the other end of it, putting my girlfriend's legs on my lap, and asked her what she was watching on TV. I turned to my right and noticed that there was a huge window on one side of the wall that gave me a perfect view of the patio. I didn't see it before because it was next to a cabinet being covered on the way to the living room. Now I knew about it. I kept turning to see outside, still thinking how scary it looks. We start watching a pretty boring documentary. I was getting sleepy, but after around 20 minutes I begin to hear noises. Now I noticed that they seem to be coming from the patio. I grab the controller and make the TV quiet, making sure that I'm hearing the correct thing, and I was. It sounded like tiny twigs breaking and grass being brushed. I quickly turned to my right to see outside the window, but I could only see the plants and part of a tree trunk from a tree. The noise, although faint, stopped for a few seconds, assuming a few moments later and then stopping again. I stood frozen watching outside my window, almost as if I was waiting for a thing to appear. "What is that noise?" I whispered to my girlfriend, but after I didn't get a reply, I turned around and stood up a little to see her eyes are closed and she's asleep. I was a bit freaked out, but I chose to believe it's a coyote or one of those animals that lurks at night. I keep watching the TV, though muted, waiting to hear the sounds again, but after a while it had stopped, I realised. I turned around one more time to see outside the window and felt my heart sink to my stomach. The first thing I noticed when I looked outside that time was a faint image of a pale grey, tall humanoid creature peeking from outside of the big tree trunk, staring back at me. Suddenly I froze in fear, not wanting to even slightly move or breathe. I watched this thing watching me, even though I couldn't see its eyes because of the poor lighting. But I knew it was watching me. I knew it was aware of me. I somehow felt it. The creature was, like I said, pale, really pale. I could see the contrast between its skin and the bark of the tree. The creature's really thin, had really skinny shoulders and a torso to match, as well as an elongated neck. It was maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. Unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, I couldn't distinguish too much details of its face or whatnot because of the darkness, but I could perfectly picture in my head how the shadowy areas around where the eyes are were definitely appearing really weird, and it had a huge hole for where its mouth should be, and it seems to be grinning, which is really, really odd. Now at this point I was trembling a little. I wanted to let my girlfriend know what I was witnessing, but I didn't want to even move a muscle or break eye contact with that thing. It felt like I needed to remain still or play dead to loosen its attention, but no, it's still staring at me, not moving an inch, like it was trying to do the same. Then, to turn things around and make it even worse for me, the creature started to make a clicking sound which echoed, kind of like a frog but slower. I then noticed that it begins to turn its head to the side and turn back to look at me really quick. I didn't know what to think anymore. All I wanted was my girlfriend to wake up and prove to me that the thing was real. I began whispering her name in between my teeth and mouth. I don't even want to move my jaw, but she doesn't wake up. The thing kept doing the same, turning its head left and to the right really quick now. The creature was kind of like when the big predator cats are hunting and they lay low preparing to attack. "What the heck?" I whisper. I know, stupid. I didn't think through what I was doing, but I didn't think through what if I woke up my girlfriend. She starts moving and that thing notices both of us, but I was so scared. This thing went around for maybe less than 15 minutes before I realised that I still had my girlfriend's foot in my hand in the blanket, so the thing would not be able to see me moving. Only using my wrist, I slightly pulled her leg back and forth, whispering her name, but no response. Then, I stood in shock while I saw the creature stand up again, walking backwards, still looking at me, and then disappearing into the darkness of the patio with the clicking sounds. I pulled saliva and blinked a few times, realising my eye itched from staring at it for so long. For some reason, I couldn't turn my head around. I was fixated on the area that the creature had come from. Now a few minutes passed, very slowly, almost like in slow motion. I turned to try and wake up my girlfriend again. Her foot jerked and she starts turning. I stood up to her shoulders and patted her, whispering, "Hey, wake up." She opened her eyes and squinted at me, adjusting to the TV light, wondering why I woke her up. I kept telling her to remain silent and still when I heard the sounds again. She looked at me and notices a concern in my eyes, saying, "What's wrong?" I tell her be quiet. Then I put 2 fingers on her lips, again trying to make her be quiet. I could see she was scared and I don't blame her. I would be too if somebody woke me up like that and I didn't know what was happening. The clicking went off again, but it was louder this time, almost as if that thing was on the other side of the window. This time, both of us heard the noise and we looked at each other in silence. My girlfriend asked me again what was happening, but almost in slow motion, I slowly turned my head to the window to check, and there it was. The thing was right outside the window, only a couple of feet away, staring right back at me. This time, I had a clearer version of it now. But I was petrified, and I noticed that it doesn't actually have a mouth where a person should. Instead, it's on its neck, which opened horizontally, not vertically. And its mouth opened and vibrated, making the clicking sound, and I can see many small razor-like teeth. It had oval-shaped eyes which were as dark as the night. I felt its gaze pierce my soul. I started shaking and breathing faster, not believing what I'm seeing. My girlfriend peeked by my side to see what I was looking at, and I instantly felt her body tense up as she started to ask me in a terrible voice, "What's that?" but no answer ever come out of me. Now we're both scared, not even moving a muscle. After the humanoid notices my girlfriend move, it gave a step forward and lowered its head, almost as though scanning us. We actually both jumped in fear after seeing it doing this. My heart is pounding so fast, I think I'm actually gonna faint. And then, this weird thing starts slowly turning to its right side, in the direction where the door is in the corridor, resuming the sounds. If you have seen the movie Signs and remember the scene where the humanoid came out of the bushes into the house, this would have been an accurate representation of what we saw. We took a good look at every inch of this thing's body. It then starts turning towards us. We then lost sight of it through the window. We both sat up and look at each other suddenly. We hear scratching on the metal door that leads to the corridor, as if this thing was trying to get through. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my girlfriend's wrist and bolted out of the living room. We locked ourselves in the bedroom. We sat on the floor right next to the bedroom, hiding in case that thing got inside. The scratching sounds continued, and my girlfriend starts to cry, asking, did we see the same thing? I felt powerless, and I couldn't do much to try and reassure her. I could only hold her and hope that this thing gave up and left. The noises continued for about 3 minutes before it suddenly stops. Then, we hear footsteps and noises all around the house, so we kept turning, not sure what to do. Eventually the sounds stop. After about an hour, we figured this thing left. My girlfriend, still in tears, told me we could lay in bed. I agreed because my back was hurting from that crouching position. We slowly crawl into bed, making the least possible sound, and covering ourselves with another blanket. I tell her not to worry. I tightened my grip around her. She didn't reply, but after a while she fell asleep. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night though. I kept my eyes open, listening for sounds around us. The next day, we didn't even want to touch the subject. All we said is that that creature is not from this world. My girlfriend said that she felt that creature pierce into her soul. Now, nothing else was said and we were really traumatized. I realized that she was going to have to put up with that fear whenever going out in the future or in the woods or something. Days after the encounter, we both suffered from nightmares. She mentioned that sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night screaming and trembling. The fences that separated the patio actually had been redone since, and they now stand about 2 meters tall, blocking easy access from the woods. I've since kept wondering what that thing was. Was it a humanoid? Was it some kind of cryptid, or maybe an alien? Now the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there. and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story, and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person, and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now, I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night, you'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now, I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened, and we just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night, and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you're hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on, and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleet, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd, and I tell myself just to relax a bit, and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here, and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice 1 or 2 strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier, and I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't hum here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around, so that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they've gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared and it was extremely close to me, For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now it reminds me of a story of what one of my other Fire Ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate, and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw, in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist. And again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again, I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me, why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen? And to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remember they were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refuse to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it. just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same, and you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit, not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seem to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light, but again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did, and this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now, the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again, it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's a eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment, I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it is a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now, some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So, I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my light on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there, But again, I just presumed it was people, and I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long, and they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly, and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour. But I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but In those moments, it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now, it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now, I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery is virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace, and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now, momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends, and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything, and I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me. But I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me. While working as a park ranger, I made a really weird discovery. Somewhere nestled away was a small bungalow-style building on the land that we had to cover. Now, it's something that I actually hadn't noticed before, so this was interesting for me. I'd worked here for quite a number of years and decided that one day, while off duty, I was going to investigate it with one of my really good friends. We've been best friends for quite a long time and we're really excited about this specific adventure. We got a bit older now, so didn't constantly go out like this, so it was really nice to. While we head out, it's quite a nice autumn day, and everything's as it should be. While walking, we encounter a group of other people, and what's really strange is we see somebody wearing all yellow. They literally look like a monk. Now, we can't be absolutely certain of this, but they were definitely out of place for where we are. They basically headed off a different direction than the one that we're in, so we'll never be exactly sure. It took us quite a long time to actually find the location too. It was nowhere near where it should have been. I don't know why, it was kind of weird because we seemed to have to walk for miles and miles and never actually got close to it. However, eventually, on the horizon in a clearing, we find it, and we were ecstatic. Now, we hadn't explored anything like this before, but there were rumours that there was a really complex system under here, so we're incredibly excited when we find a small wall that we can break into. I don't suggest doing this though, because to be honest, we were probably technically trespassing, and were vandalising. I mean, gosh, I work there too. But that isn't the point of now. So what happens is my friend actually goes in first because he's a bit smaller than me, so he finds it a lot easier to go through the clearing. We then wonder if this is just a normal house, as there seems to be no way to get any further. We're actually quite disappointed, until suddenly my friend says, "Hey, Bill, check this out." I turn and what do you know? There's one small hatch which has ladders down it. The ladder's actually extremely sketchy, to be honest. I don't know why I went down it first, but we actually make it. Then, we're met with a huge steel door. This thing was probably built during the Cold War. It was so cool to find it. There was quite a lot of graffiti around, so we definitely weren't the first people to discover this, but it was really interesting. There was all kinds of trash in the first part. Through the steel door, however, we're met with an extremely long corridor, concrete lined with random boxes around with markings that we couldn't read anymore. We thought this was crazy. We hadn't seen anything like it before. It was like stepping back in time in the 70s. There was a strange smell too. It kind of smelled like rotting something. We presumed that animals were using this as their home and probably had died or something, but it was pretty weird. Now we continue down the corridor, and that's when we get the first feeling that we might not be alone here. Every so often, we would hear some kind of banging sound on the walls. Now we couldn't figure out exactly what was making it, because we could never seem to get close to the source of the sound. But that was the first thing that was odd. We presumed that maybe there was other people down here, so we both turned off our torches for a short while and just listened. We don't hear much of anything, so just accept that it's probably just some kind of animals, or who knows, rats or something. We continue on, and suddenly my friend's torch goes off. Doesn't matter, I've got a spare one. Now what's specifically weird though, is that this is a very good torch. It's ones that the park rangers where I am are issued, so it basically never goes out. You can also recharge it, and I'm trying to do this constantly, but it doesn't make a difference. So that's really weird. Now we're down to just one, and I know we should have headed back, but for some reason, we're just too excited and motivated to press on. But we're not really finding much, just room after room which is completely abandoned, so we're starting to get quite bored now. The other issue is we weren't really tracking where we were going, so we're basically just going deeper and deeper into who knows what, where we're never going to have cell signal or anything. We eventually come up to one area which is cut off by some kind of wardrobe pressed up against where we are. We basically can't get through the doorway. It looks like somebody's tried to barricade it, but it didn't work. We start hitting the door and trying our very best to get in, but again, it doesn't make much of a difference. That's when my torch goes out and things get real. Almost instantly, there's some kind of high-pitched noise. It kind of sounds like a distant alarm or something. And we notice that the temperature's got so much colder than our surroundings should be. We were completely fine up until this moment, and now it feels extremely cold. Now it gets worse as we start to hear movement. It was almost like the second the torch went out, this place became alive, and we weren't alone any longer. So we explored deeper and deeper, trying now to get out, with my buddy finally getting his torch to come to life, but only extremely limited, and only for a few seconds at a time. Again, I've never seen anything like this before. Then suddenly, we hear it, the sounds of footsteps. We don't say anything, we start turning back in the opposite direction, but these footsteps sound very loud. They're definitely coming in our direction, and our torches just don't go on. We realise someone's here and we're not supposed to be, and we start going, following the lining of the wall, trying to find our way out of here, but we just can't. We cannot seem to get away from whatever this is. It seems like they're not definitely going after us, but they seem to be searching room to room trying to find someone. I say them because it sounded like there might have been more than one, but I'm not sure. I try my very best to hold my breath as we round corner after corner, not really getting anywhere. Every so often the lights come on again, and it's cold enough that you can actually see mist forming when we're expiring, which is crazy. It wasn't like this before. Unless it started snowing outside, I don't see how this could have happened, but it's autumn and it's not likely where we are. Now I whisper to my buddy that we've got to get out of here, and we finally find the long corridor. We both stop for a few seconds and my torch comes to life again. I see the silhouette of somebody and I say, "Come on, what are you doing, Brian? Turn back." Then Brian says, "Dude," and I realise he stood right next to me as I see the silhouette of somebody coming towards us, but I don't know who they are. For a second I'm frozen and my torch goes out again. I scream out a swear word and hit it, and by God knows what luck, it comes back to life again finally. And now, it's extremely bright and nobody's there, but we can still hear footsteps coming towards us. I actually drop the torch in fear and it goes out once again. I swear, and we sprint, and we're following the length of the corridor. We follow this and we know it's the way that we come in. We turn around and now make it into the main latch that we have to go through, as this is going to lead to the ladders out of there. I'm going up at absolute record speed and actually cut my hand while doing so. I'm shaking now, and suddenly I'm almost blinded by the sunlight. I quickly jump through the small gap, and so does my friend. We take a second to lay on the ground and let our breaths readjust. I can actually feel on my clothes how cold they are, and again it doesn't make sense. We sit there for a second staring at each other, and we can hear it. Footsteps following once more. This time you can hear them at the bottom of the stairs towards the latch where the ladder is. We both turn and bolt it out of there. We run and eventually see some other hikers who look at us like we're absolute madmen, but maybe we were. They did not know what we had seen or what we were running from. Eventually we get back to civilization and relative safety, but I don't know what to make of this. Since this day I felt like it's kind of robbed me of some of my creative or exploratory freedom. I'm so scared to go anywhere on my own now. Even while doing that job for a few more years afterwards, I could never go in that area. Even when I was sent out there to do things, I would just lie and kind of hang around the border of it. I don't think I've been the same since this encounter. This story that I'm about to tell is from a family friend who is passionate about the subject. Now, the first actually happened in 2013. The family friend, we'll call him Joe to preserve his anonymity, it's a good choice, lives on the outskirts of town, about 5 miles away from the nearest gas station. There's quite a bit of a forested area, but most of it is private property. There's a house right across the street from this, so he's not totally isolated. Anyway, one evening, Joe got done picking squash from his garden. He had put it in a bucket and he left it on the side of the porch and forgot about it overnight. The next day, he went looking for the squash and realized that he left it outside. He went out on the porch and the bucket was gone. He didn't really think too much of it. He figured a raccoon had taken it. He did find it strange, however, that whatever it was had taken the whole bucket and that none of the squash had been spilled out. It was like something big actually carried it away, but took some care to not spill any of it, as opposed to rummaging throughout like a raccoon would. A few days later, Joe came home from work to find a dead mouse on his doorstep, wrapped in a leaf and some grass. He looked at it for a moment in curiosity. The mouse had been meticulously placed inside of the leaf with grass made to look like a sandwich. He then began to think that maybe somebody was messing around with him, or maybe there was some kind of witch or something in the area trying to put a curse on. Nothing else happened for about a year until one night, Joe was sitting in his living room watching television when something out of the corner of the eye catches his attention through the window around the garden. He looked out and saw a figure hunched over and looking through his squash plants. He then went outside to confront whoever or whatever the thing was. When he got outside, he was surprised by just how little noise the creature was making. It was like it was trying to hide, and he took a step on his porch, causing the wood to creak and the creature to look up at him. He couldn't get a good look at his face, but there was a distinctive shine in its eye caused by it looking up towards his porch light. It stood up on 2 legs and he got a good look at its body. It was very large and bulky. He estimates that it must have been about 7 feet tall. It was black and hairy and man-like in its form. As soon as it saw him, it bolted away into the woods with lightning pace. It didn't make a sound really. There was no doubt in his mind that this is a Bigfoot, and Joe understood, understandably, that he was going to have trouble to fall asleep that night. As he laid awake, he begins to wonder if the creature had been in any way connected to the mouse that he received on the doorstep about a year ago. He said that he believed that the thing could have carried the bucket of squash. The next morning, Joe decided to try a little bit of an experiment. He took some turkey and rolled it up in a leaf and some grass, much like the mouse had been before, putting it on his picnic table out the lawn and gone for work. When he gone back, the turkey, the leaves and grass were gone. He studied the area, but couldn't find any signs of it. Not even the grass was disturbed as far as he could tell. Then he approaches his door, and on the doorstep is another mouse, this time decapitated, and instead of leaves and grass, there was a small pile of berries next to it. He's actually not seen the creature since then, but he really strongly believes that it's what's been swapping gifts with him. It continues to the present day. When he got a whole deer antler just 4 months ago, he started setting up trail cams to try and capture that thing on video. Whatever was leaving presents, but he couldn't find anything. He's still trying to catch it, and I'll keep you posted if he finds anything. He told me that sometimes it always feels like it's watching him and will intentionally not show up when he puts cameras up, but I don't know if it's that intelligent or if it's just not actually there. Who knows if this is a Bigfoot or what it is. This all happened way back in 2017 while I was camping with my friend. He had huge farmland surrounded by forest. We were outside in the front of the farmhouse in a tent. He was asleep, but me always having insomnia, I was awake all of a sudden, but I can hear loud footsteps coming from outside of the forest over in the direction of the tent. This scares me, because I don't know what it is. A bear? A deer? I had no clue. I was waiting for the footsteps to stop outside of the tent, and I was preparing myself for the worst, because since of the direction it's heading, I assume that this thing is a threat. I thought something was going to happen, but it didn't. Now, it's then heading in the direction of the other tents. That's what I assumed was going to happen. Now, it goes past my tent. After hearing these loud, slow, methodical footsteps coming out of the woods, ignore two defenseless kids, then silently pass for maybe 10 minutes, curiosity starts to eat away at me. When I was a kid, I was stupid, so I actually unzipped the tent and peeked my head outside to see if I can see anything. I'm looking all around the tree line, the house and everywhere, and I cannot find the source of the footsteps. I'm just about to put my head back inside when I spot something that doesn't really make sense to me. Behind the farmhouse to the right is the actual farm, and this is where this happened. I see a pole. I saw what looked like a 30 feet tall greyish silver pole standing next to this farm. It had this shiny glisten to it in the moonlight. I studied this weird structure up and down with my eyes confused, because I knew well that I should have easily been able to notice this before, but I hadn't. It wasn't there. By the way, I called this thing a pole, but after looking at it really hard, I realised that it had arms and legs. They looked like rods, perfectly symmetrical and proportional with its size and stature. It looked so smooth and round, and it almost looked like it stretched out. It's hard to explain. It was spinning in a circle ever so slowly. I was dumbfounded and have no idea about what to think of this, and all of a sudden, this thing, this tall, shiny 30-foot spinning pole, suddenly took a step back into the woods, started spinning slowly, still glistening and shining in the moonlight. I had no idea how to react. I felt completely at a loss afterwards and just kind of went back to the tent and laid on my back until the sun comes up. I got no sleep at all after that day and never hung out with that friend again at the farm. I don't know what it is. Trick of the eye? A humanoid? Your guess is as good as mine. I believe I had an encounter in August 2005 when I was 19. I visited Point Pleasant with my friend and fiance. We were just kids being dumb. Thought it'd be a good idea to go and find the Mothman. We didn't even plan the trip out very much. We borrowed this old tent that belonged to my fiance's father, and I swear to God, it hadn't been opened since the 70s. When we made it into town, it was already dark. We stopped at a police station, and they're friendly enough, told us where to camp. Now we went down all these creepy back roads and seemed to get into more dark and desolated places while doing so. We were having a good time though, pretending to scare the life out of each other, as kids do. We're all driving down one back road just surrounded by woods. It's completely dark other than our headlights, and suddenly out of nowhere, we can see these two round eyes glowing in the sky. I know it sounds strange, but honest to God, it's what happened. And we're all terrified because of how high above the ground they are. We start screaming like girls and my fiance floored it. The initial shock and just feeling is one that doesn't escape me. My fiance recovered and wanted to set up camp. My friend and I thought that it wasn't a good idea and we refused to sleep anywhere near the woods. We ended up sleeping in the car in a hospital parking lot once we're back to civilization. We later found out the directions to the camping spot was in and around the TNT area. We had no prior information about such and barely planned it at all. We had breakfast at Biscuit World, that sounds good, the next morning, and for whatever reason chose not to share our encounter with anyone. I guess we thought that nobody would believe us if we did. We left a day early since we didn't want to try it and sleep in the car in August again. When we got home, Hurricane Katrina had made its way all the way towards the Gulf Coast. It was all over the news. Now, it just struck me though, because a Mothman sighting is supposed to be the omen of tragedy and misfortune. I know it sounds crazy, but believe me, that's what we found that day. This took place in the summer of 2009. I was born and raised in the plains of Texas, specifically in an area where the black-eyed kid sightings are prevalent. I've heard the stories, tales and legends, whatever you want to call them, since I was young, but I never truly believed them. The black-eyed kids was something I was mainly entertaining as a joke or something. Now, it was in a warm night in June. I was up late around 2 AM, as I typically like staying up late, especially in the summer, since it would stay fairly warm even after the sun gone down. I had just run up to the store to grab a big fountain drink and was returning into my home through the back door when I was approached by two children, a girl and a boy. I was very startled once I realised that they were there, since I wasn't expecting to encounter anybody so late in the backyard. The little boy asked, "Can I come in? We need to use the phone and are lost." This is when I noticed the blackness of their eyes. Both of them had eyes that were so black they appear as though they're pits. Now, this is also when my heart sank. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing them. They were literally right there in front of me. As I mentioned before, I heard the legends most of my life, so there was no way I was going to let them in my home. I darted into the back door and locked it as quick as I could. Once inside, I ran upstairs and flipped on the lights, trying to see if they're outside. Thankfully, by then, they're gone. I had so much adrenaline pumping by that point, though, that I grabbed a weapon and began searching the house, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. It took me hours to get to sleep that night, and it's still an encounter that stayed with me for the rest of my life. These entities took the form of something most people view as innocent, weak, mild, and tried to trick unsuspecting people to do God knows what to them. I'm just glad that my reflexes actually kicked in that day, and I'm still alive to be able to tell you the tale. A few years ago, I was outside with one of my friends after church. He looked at a nearby wooded area and saw what he claimed to be a pair of glowing eyes. This was at like 12 PM, so it couldn't have been an owl. The guy's also 2 or 3 years older than me and was really scared. I live next door to this church, so it scared the life out of me. Anybody know what it could have been? Now, I came across one of the reports concerning the black-eyed kids in Pennsylvania. My cousins and I had a very weird experience in September 2011. We both lived in the town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I had been hunting and camping together since we were like 12 years old. We had graduated from high school that spring and planned to go camping later in the summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop-up camper and headed off. We planned to stay for a week or so at a place southwest of a city in the forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set off a small clearing. We both thought that the area looks familiar, but we can't recall exactly why. When we headed back there was this weird sound and feeling, and we both looked at each other. Now, I don't know what it was, but it made us feel odd. We didn't really have much planned to do together in the area other than hike around. Both of us were going to move away from home the next spring, so we'd likely not see each other again. I'll be honest, the camping trip was really a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a bit. We didn't do that much on the first night other than drinking a few beers and talk. We were in our racks early that night. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We started at about 10 AM and headed west towards the lake. We'd been walking no more than an hour when we heard what sounded like somebody yelling up ahead of us. It didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking towards the sound. After about 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back pretty easily. We did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to the campsite late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started making dinner. And we sat to eat, and there was the sound of something moving through the trees north of us. There were lots of small animals in the area, so we figured that's what it is. A few minutes later, we heard thrashing sounds like something was sweeping at a small tree and bushes. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it was, it soon stops, but every once in a while it would start up again. That night, we could hear the sweeping sound coming off from the same area, which is really odd to us. The next morning it was quiet, so we walked in the direction that the sounds come from before. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to the campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop-up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was there, I heard my cousin saying something. I asked what he wanted. He replied that I had better get out of there. I looked through the netting and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit on standing at the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man, "Can we help you?" He just smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I looked at each other and kind of laughed, but he then starts going towards us slowly. I ask what he wants, but he stopped walking about 15 feet away. Right away I realise that his eyes are totally black, and the tracksuit that he has had caked mud and dirt on it. I asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm just taking a walk and meeting my people." By this time I was freaked out, and my cousin walked towards the pop-up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face, like he senses we are armed. So he turned and walked towards the woods, at the edge of the clearing, and turned and said, "I'll see you boys later," and made a laugh as he returns to the wilderness. We didn't need another confrontation like that, so we gathered up everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We did set up at another area, but it's about 70 miles south of there. We had an enjoyable couple of days, but when we get together, we still wonder who that guy was and what he wanted from us. Now for some context, this happened about 10 years ago on a hill southwest from Branquilla, Colombia. I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of things, but this, I'm absolutely sure that what I saw was real. I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in a not so friendly place. Very hot, really rough terrain, awfully humid. Our troop was more like military service than scout life. It was kind of far enough away from the main road, and the main base was in a tree-covered hill. I think that could be worth noting that it was less than 5 kilometers from an indigenous sacred site known as the Sacred Territory of the Creator, and probably it was a sacred site also, but I don't know, since the tribes that inhabited the area were forced by the Spanish to abandon their belief, traditions and language, so there's a lot of things that we don't really know about, even I being descendant from them. It was 3 PM. We sent 3 people to the dishes after lunch. There was a small lagoon about 5 to 10 minutes downhill. It shouldn't have took more than half an hour for them to get back. An hour passes and they haven't returned. Knowing them, surely they're just having trivial fun or something and gossiping, but as a patrol leader, I have to call them back. They didn't respond to whistles, so I personally went down there to find them. The way to the lagoon is mostly a 2.5 foot path between a steep hill and a dry river that has dense vegetation. Now, I was walking carelessly until I noticed something behind a curve. At first I thought it was a massive vulture, but I felt uneasy, so I started going back in silence until I stepped over a dry branch. After the crackling, that thing extended its wing, showing a massive muscular humanoid back and a head that watches me. Then it took the sound of more like a helicopter than a bird. Nonsense, I thought, trying to come up with a rational explanation to this. Maybe it's just my imagination. I then arrived to the lagoon, and effectively, they were having the most boring and dumb of conversations. I told them to pack everything and start going back to the campsite when all the troops come out of the tree-covered area and told me that I was taking too long. But my encounter couldn't have been more than 5 seconds or so. Anyway, there was a boy who said I'll go in front and entered to the woods alone. 5 seconds later, I heard the same helicopter-like sound, and the boy came running back, hyperventilating, saying that he saw a giant birdman. Everybody laughed, but I didn't say a word. Now, today I'd like to share my story that happened quite a number of years ago, though the feelings have never really left me. I'm somebody who spent a lot of time working out in nature. I was a park ranger, so I'd always done things outside. I mean, not just while I was at work, but for other reasons too. I remembered I had some friends that were really begging me to go out to the desert with them. I had this best friend called John, and he was the one who was the most up for it. He kept on telling me about all of these crazy experiences that he had out in this particular area of the desert. He said that he would see these people, well, he kind of describes them as some kind of beings or something, and I don't know, it was linked to UFOs and things, and I'm actually sure that I saw a UFO once. I was on top of one of our towers that you use for lookouts, and I saw a light in the sky that almost appeared red then purple, then suddenly split off in 4 different directions with different sections of it going the different ways. So yeah, I was kind of up for this. I was a little skeptical. I mean, even though I'd seen a UFO, I didn't really trust my eyes, and being out there and being so bored at times, I guess your mind plays tricks on you. But this friend John kept on and on going on about it, and eventually I decided to agree. He said it was kind of like a spiritual place that you could go to, and pretty much you'd be able to talk through all of your problems with these beings and that everything would be okay. Now, don't ask me why I actually agreed to do this. I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking at the time. I'm not someone who really gives into peer pressure too. He'd actually been going on about this for ages, and I don't know, I felt bad for always saying no, so we set out on one particular day. We parked up and made sure that we have all of our water with us, and we set off. Now, we had some camping gear with us, so we're going to be okay as long as the water didn't run too low. We decided that we'd never go far from where we parked, so that way we can always go back and get more supplies if we really need them. So with that, off we went. Now, the first area that we're going in, you can see lots of different tire tracks, and apparently, according to John, this wasn't good because it meant other people would be around, but he told me not to worry too much about this. The area that we're in is actually pretty nice. We're kind of flanked by hills, and there's kind of like a mountainy part up ahead of us. It looks really cool though, to be honest. And we continue on our hike. Now, John's actually a really good friend, and he's genuinely one of the only people that actually understands me and is very similar with me in life. We have had a few arguments, but just over silly things, and I guess this guy was more of a brother than my actual brother to me at times. Now, that meant we would talk about everything. Often it was about relationships and other things that had went wrong in our lives before, and the more we spoke, I guess the more that we realised we're similar. And again, I didn't actually know just how similar we were. I mean, heck, It was pretty unbelievable, but I won't share too many details here about that, just because it kind of goes into some of the darkness that we both seem to experience somehow at the same time, almost living opposite lives, but parallel emotionally. So we talk through everything, and he says that we're not too far from where we need to get to, and that's when we encounter the first group of people. Now, they do seem a little bit weird at first. John also seems a little bit hesitant, but he ends up going up to them and starts talking. It turns out that they're here for the same reason, and although they seem a little bit weird, we decide to try and talk to them. I wasn't sure if one of them was on something, but he just seemed too talkative. They tell us that they've got something they want us to drink, and apparently they made some nice bush tea for us. Who was I to say no, and I end up drinking it. We exchange a couple of snacks, and it was actually a really good time. Now, we'd been with these guys for quite a while and eventually decided that it's time to leave them and go on. Now, we continue on our way, and you can actually see that the path is marked by different rocks that people have put there, so we know that we're not going anywhere too dangerous or anything. My friend John constantly reminds me to drink lots of water, and I keep doing so. I seem to get a headache now, which I really can't fend off for some reason. I have pretty sensitive eyes though. I can't even look at the ground when it's bright without sunglasses, without my eyes being strained. I also get this weird thing where I kind of see like flashy lights or something, but I know what it is. It's not a migraine, but I guess it's just my eyes going weird. Sometimes I'll see a strange bright colour too, but I guess that doesn't matter too much. We come up to one part of the hike where there's quite a big drop on the left hand side of us. If we're going to fall now, we're going to be in trouble, so we really try our best to avoid this. My friend then says that we haven't got too much further to go before we get to the people, and that's when we encounter some rangers. That's really odd, I think. There shouldn't be any rangers up here whatsoever. I don't know what they're doing, and we just say hi, and don't really think much of it and just keep going. They seem a little odd, but I wasn't paying too much attention. That's when my buddy John says, "Did you notice something?" I say, "No, what's that?" He says, "Well, those guys looked almost exactly the same as each other, and I don't know, something just felt really off about them." I didn't really notice it, but trying to think of it, it almost felt like they didn't have much of a facial expression, almost like they were wearing a rubber mask, but I can't really tell. They eventually go off a little bit further, and we don't think too much of it as they slowly go out of sight. I then explain that I've heard about some twins who become park rangers in an area not far from where I was working at the time, and that, yeah, it's just basically a normal thing that you will get stuff like this. You know, you get families who are raised in the outdoors like me, and that's what the families want to do, jobs like ours. And my buddy John tells me not to worry too much and makes a joke out of it. And I tell him, hey, I'm not the one worried here. And we press on. Now my friend keeps on talking to me about this thing and how great it's going to be. And eventually we set up the tents. We do this, and I keep on slamming my water. One thing that's weird is that I haven't really had the urge to urinate too much yet. Usually I'll be going like every 10 seconds almost, but I don't really feel the urge to. I guess it was hot, but the weird thing is it's not really too hot now. There's kind of an overcast in the clouds, and it means that it's not really warm, it's actually a little bit cold. But John says, hey, come on man, we've got to go up to this before sundown, because this hill is where you're going to see it. Now I was either convinced that he was just off his head, or there were actually aliens here. We're nowhere near Roswell, so it wasn't anything like that, but I don't know, I've given him the benefit of the doubt. Talking to this friend though was honestly like a therapy in itself. It was almost like the ideas that I had, my friend could give me, and the ideas that he had, he could give me, and it would kind of complete each other. Not in a weird way, but just kind of like a nice bond and friendship. So yeah, it's getting a little bit dark, and I keep telling my buddy that we have to remember where the tent is because we're not going to see it. My friend doesn't take much notice of me and keeps on going. Now, He says that he's going to continue on, but I say that I feel like I need to stop for a bit. I don't know why, but suddenly the headache becomes absolutely overwhelming. Now, my friend continues on and I just let him go. Now, I feel extremely tired suddenly and I don't want to sleep, but you know when you try and lay on your side and not sleep, you know what happens? Yeah, you end up sleeping. Now, that was exactly what happened to me. I managed to wake myself up a couple of times, but I kind of drift off again. It's almost like I've got an alarm clock in my head, but I permanently had it on snooze and I wake up again. When I woke up, I felt like I'd slept for ages and almost like I'd had the best night's sleep of my life, but everything felt different now. I get up and look at the sky, and it's kind of got like an orange hue to it, and I continue on the trail and try and find where my friend is. For some reason when I wake up, I suddenly feel much more peaceful. I wasn't concerned about finding my friend and I presumed that he just left me there to sleep and went back to the tent, so I decided to go on myself. I drank quite a lot of water again and I was actually running out in my first tank, which is surprising. Again, no urge to urinate, which I think is really weird, but I keep going. Now as I'm walking, I can hear a strange humming. It was almost like a kind of energy is the best way I can describe it. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I knew I should keep going and I thought maybe, just maybe, this is what John was telling me about. And I thought in the back of my head, maybe this is him up here making those sounds. I decide to continue and I make it a bit further now. The guy's actually quite tough here and the terrain's quite rocky now. I'm not too happy about this because I keep on whacking my shins when I'm trying to go up this thing. And also I keep getting little branches and things that are cutting up my ankles. But for some reason I'm not too bothered by this, and that's weird too because usually I'm really worried. As I get higher and higher up, I realise something weird now. I seem to be talking to myself in my head kind of far too much. It's quite weird. It goes from very positive to suddenly very negative, and it keeps on switching between the two. And that's when I realise that something's different about the sky. The colours seem off and the sky just seems far too bright. Now, I think this is really bizarre, but nothing too much to worry about. Again, I wasn't really thinking straight at this time. Now, I end up just walking and walking and I don't necessarily have a destination in mind. I don't know how far I was gone for, but I see my buddy up ahead of me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, John, and he keeps on walking around the corner. I think, God, you're such an idiot. My foot was starting to hurt now and I can't be bothered to walk quicker, but I practically force myself to power up towards him. I eventually make it there and I realise something strange. He's just vanished. I try and figure out where that he's actually gone to, and I walk up the hill and look over it, and there he is again. John! John, I scream out, but he doesn't listen. What's weird is that he just keeps on and on walking, but he seems to be far too far away from me. Even if he sprinted down this hill, he shouldn't have been able to get this far, and I suddenly realise that I can't see him any longer. I think this is odd and I look around, and suddenly I've realised that there's a few more people around. There's quite a lot up on a ridge and they're all waving at me trying to get me to come over to them. I can see that they brought some kind of dirt bike with them and I put my hand on it, but I decide to leave it because it's theirs. I think that this is a group that we've seen earlier, so I start to go further and further. And my God, do I have a bad migraine or something because my eyes are going a bit funny. I'm kind of seeing the weird colours again, but my vision's definitely a bit off now. I try not to think too much of it, and I reach down and realise that there's all water over my hand. I quickly start slapping around trying to figure out where the source of it's from, and notice how cold my hand is, when I realise that suddenly my hand isn't wet and it's in my head. I'm not aware that something's off at this point, and I just thought it was lucky that there's no water here. I then open up my bag and start drinking. and I realise that the heavens have opened up now. There's rain falling all around me, and it feels quite nice to be out of the desert sun. Now, I eventually make it up to the hill where all the people are waving, and it seems like they're being very friendly to me, saying good things and encouraging me. I stop to get a bit of breath and rest my legs for a few moments, and I say, "Hey guys, wait for me, I won't be long." And that's when I realise that my vision's gone a bit weird. It almost feels like I'm going backwards now, but I'm not. I take a few deep breaths and I become very, very conscious of my breathing and the rain around me. This calms me a lot, and I think the deep breathing did me some good. And I'll continue on and make sure that I can see my new friends at the top of the hill. There seems to be less and less of them now, and I eventually make it all the way up there. Now when I get to the very top, suddenly something changes. It's almost like they've all just appeared around me suddenly, but as I look at them, their faces seem off, and I suddenly notice that there's something very inhuman about them. Now, their faces look much more scary, and suddenly they morph into some kind of dark figures which tower over me. I mean, it starts off with about my height until they're about 2 or 3 times taller, and suddenly they surround me. But for whatever reason, I don't feel afraid and I don't feel scared of anything. I kind of notice that they're around me, and because I can't see now, I kind of lose my balance and fall over for a second. When I fall over, I'm staring back up at the sky now. I don't feel any pain or anything, but I can see lightning bolts all around me, and the rain picks up a lot more. I wiped my eyes trying to figure out what was happening when I eventually managed to get myself up off the ground again. I'm looking around and the figures are gone. I think, my god, did I encounter them? Was that it? What did I get out of this? Did I learn anything? Did I see anything? Are they actually there? And I think that this can't necessarily be anything that I actually believe's there. And I decide that I should keep looking for John. It suddenly clicks again. Now, that's when I start to get a bit scared. I have a sudden feeling of panic, and the more that I panic, the worse I feel, and I start picking up the pace more and more. And I start to see these beings again. These are different from the ones that I've seen earlier, and they seem a lot more malicious and malevolent. The further I go, the closer they seem to come towards me. It gets to a point where I honestly feel like there's an army of them behind me, and I don't dare look around. I'm not sure how long this went on for with this weird feeling of being followed, but my god, it must have been a long time. And I can tell you that I did not feel good during 1 second of it. I was trying to loop my way back round to where the tent should be, but to be honest, I had no idea of where I was going. Now, as you can imagine, this is incredibly dangerous out in the desert, especially if you're on your own, but I wasn't thinking of that. I remember eventually I was able to stop and turn around, and they're gone again. I look up in the sky for UFOs, and the stars seem to be too bright, and there seems to be too many of them. I wipe my eyes and it's rain again. I realise something's definitely off now. I start trying to hit my head, not hard, just enough to make sure I'm awake, but yes, I am. Now suddenly things seem to go straight back to normal. The raining stopped now, which I'm pretty happy about, and I continue now, but I'm no longer on the path. I'm going towards some kind of darker area now, where the sun seems to be far from me. I get here and I feel like I'm on a barren wasteland, and I call out for John. All I'm met with is echoes, and I'm convinced that he's back in the tent. I say, "John, you better be in that tent and I better find you there." And I start trying to go downhill now, and that's when I fall. I don't know how it happened, but I can only imagine that my foot got snagged on a rock, and I actually fall quite a bit down, tumbling. I fall asleep again, and now I wake up and John is prodding me. At least I think it's John. I say, "John, what are you doing?" confused as to who it is, and that's when I see it. one of the dark beings has found me, and there's a sea of stars behind him, and he takes me by my hand and lifts me up. Now, as he's lifting me up, I realise that I'm in some kind of different area again to where I thought I was. For some reason, this being seems a lot more friendly than the others, and seems to be guiding me away from wherever I was before. I look back and I can see the army of the others once again, and this thing just demands without saying anything that I look forward, and that's exactly what I do. Now, I keep going down pretty treacherous terrain, but this thing seems to be really helping me get through. Now, as weird as it sounds, I was pretty much having a full-on conversation with this thing in my head. It spoke in almost like a hushed tone, but kind of with more reverberation. It was like every time that it spoke, I would hear things and feel it through my body. I was asking where we were going and it said to safety, and I kept asking what's happening and it kept saying don't worry, don't worry. Now I'm not sure when it happened, but this being, whatever it is, left me, and it was up to me to continue the rest of the journey. I look around and it's much further away now, pointing, trying to usher me to go forwards, and I follow it. I'm now walking pretty close to some kind of crevasse or something. Almost like a very, very small Grand Canyon's probably the best way that I can describe it, but maybe not grand because of how small it is. Again, I'm going on a pretty sheer rock face, and how I don't fall at this point is beyond me. I know that my fall was definitely real though because of the blood on my white socks. Now, it doesn't take too much longer, and a miracle happens. I can see the tent, and it's where it should be. And I can see the silhouette of something or someone in it. Is it my friend? What is it? I think to myself. Now, I'm pretty much glued to the spot, and I've realised that I've been asking myself this over and over again in my head for God knows how long. Until eventually, I decide that I've got to will myself forward, and it's almost like I've got to will one foot ahead of the other. I eventually make it there and open the tent. And John's there. I say, John, what are you doing? He says, hi, you're back. I was getting worried about you. I say, what do you mean? He said, I thought you said you were going to come back soon and we're going to take a leak. I say, I didn't say that. You were just going up the hill. And he looks at me very confused. I then tell him about the beings, and he tells me that he saw some too, but he wasn't sure what to think of it, because he was quite tired and thought it was a dream. He then tells me that he thinks what he saw was me and called out, but I didn't reply, so he told me to meet me back at the tent, and he fell asleep. I decided not to tell him exactly what I'd seen, and I ended up crashing out. Now, I woke up again the next morning, and my god did I feel terrible. My body felt like absolute crud, and I decided the best thing to do is slam lots of water. I feel a lot better, and suddenly my heart starts pounding. Suddenly, all of my senses come flooding back to me, and the fear, this terrible fear of realising what had happened the night before, comes back to me. I let out a loud gasp and grab my friend John, who is still sleeping. I shake him awake, and it looks like he's just seen a ghost because of the way that I've awoken him. I then explain everything that happened to him, and that's when it hits us. Something was definitely off last night. I explain my story and he then tells me his, and we weirdly both describe the beings as being almost exactly the same as each other, and we have this horrible feeling of dread, like something's really off. My friend John now realises that he definitely didn't understand what actually happened to me, and that it's weird because we have different stories of how we lost each other. We decide that we need to go back and make sure that we stay nice and hydrated because we're going to move quick, and we quickly pack up the things. Now, I can't describe to you the feeling of dread that I had when I packed up everything and I start heading back with John. I was absolutely convinced that it was paramount that we were about to be followed by those beings. Now, I have to tell you, in this moment, it was so real. What I'd seen and experienced is truly like nothing else I've ever seen on Earth before. And I don't know, in the moment I was kind of in this trance, so I just guess I went along with it. I remembered every time that I'd see a bush or tree that was darker than the rest, I almost had a mini heart attack. But I kept going. I didn't have a choice. The weird thing is too that the landscape all looked different from the way we'd come in. Luckily though, John knew the way, and eventually we make it back to the rocks which had been put there by others to mark the way. Now neither of us say anything. We're both very paranoid and constantly looking around, trying to see if there's anything there or any kind of explanation for what we'd just seen. We start talking a bit, and that's the more scared we get, the more we try and match up what had happened. Now, eventually we do make it back, and my god, getting back to being inside a vehicle was probably the best feeling in the world. I was actually so shaken up that I couldn't drive though, and I just had to lock the doors and just lay in the seat for a while, trying to think of what had happened. Had we been drugged? My buddy John then says that he thinks that we were probably drugged and that those guys probably spiked us with something that we ate or drank. He said it sounded like a weird drug that he had heard about before that can make you hallucinate, and apparently the plant for it and seeds are actually quite common in nature, and he thinks they probably got it from here and thought it'd be funny to do it and not tell us. I was convinced of the same thing because the whole thing just felt so weird. God, how could they be so evil to us? I mean, we literally could have died. We could have ended up like those hikers who went out into the wilderness and just disappeared. What really worried me is the fact that we got separated out here, completely out of our minds, both of us. Now, anything could have happened to me. I checked for bruises and I didn't have a headache or anything, but I could have easily hit my head and got brain bleeding or something. I don't know, it's just too easy to happen out here. But the thing that neither of us understand is, how do we get back? We both agree that we're probably miles away from each other at some point, because at the very least, we should have heard each other screaming out, but we didn't hear a thing. And the rest of the drive back was a pretty weird one. This is when the both of us discovered that we'd also seen the rain before, but the area around us didn't seem to be too wet. I mean, yeah, it is a desert, so it could have just evaporated, but I don't know. It just felt a little bit different somehow. And eventually we get back. Now we make it to John's mum's house, and John's mum says, God, you guys must have seen it. Surely you guys seen it, tell me you did. It was right where you guys were staying. We look at each other very concerned. Was this the first that the beings had been actually reported or what? And his mum then says, did you see the UFO? I saw it. So many of our neighbours saw it. I say, what do you mean? Getting a little bit angry. She says, the UFO. So many of us saw it. Those weird flashing lights in the sky. It was almost like a big triangle with red glowing orbs under it. It went over to roughly where you guys were staying in the desert. Then a few more appeared, and it was there in the same place for about a good half an hour. My heart drops now. Apparently it was accompanied by a quick storm, and suddenly they just shot off, never to be seen again that night. Apparently hundreds of people had all seen the same thing, and the timeline pretty much matched up to when we got over there. Now, me and John looked at each other, and we went off into his room and sat down for a while. We made some tea, and just kind of stared at each other, not knowing what to say. Now, it's been quite a while since this experience, and I don't know, I could have very easily been drugged with my friend, but the fact that a lot of what we had seen matched up with each other, and the other fact that so many people had seen something in the sky that night exactly where we are, it just seems a little bit weird. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know.